For many gamers of my age, the original Cruis'n USA on the N64 will elicit memories of great promise and, most likely, massive disappointment. Originally planned as a launch game for the N64, this was supposed to be the game for Nintendo's new machine that Ridge Racer was to the PlayStation, what Daytona USA was to the Saturn. An arcade conversion, the first game of the fabled Ultra 64 platform collaboration between Midway and Nintendo. An arcade racer that had performed exceptionally well as a coin-op and was quite a hit. But just a month before the N64 launched in the US in September 1996, Cruis'n USA was mysteriously pulled from the launch lineup. Reportedly, it was pulled for multiple reasons. It seems that running over exploding cows and deers was a big no-no for Nintendo, as was the bikini-clad lady with the trophy at the end of the race. So too was the image of then US President Bill Clinton on the roof of the White House in a hot tub, flanked by Hillary Clinton in a bikini and some other woman. The censorship hammer didn't even end there. The tunnel walls from the Washington DC level, adorned in the arcade by repeated images of $1 bills featuring Hillary Clinton smoking a massive cigar, were also to fall victim to the Big N's refusal to appear political and just became normal $1 bills. You see, Nintendo didn't, and still don't, really do political commentary in their video games. So I guess the censorship was no surprise. Although, people were pissed off at these edits. Thankfully, Twitter didn't exist in these days, so there wasn't any baseless complaints of Nintendo going woke. But a bunch of letters to complain about the censorship were sent in, and Eugene Jarvis, the director of the original arcade game, said, quote, "It seems like they don't have any sense of humour. I don't know what's wrong with these people." Ouch. In reality though, the game also failed to hit quality benchmarks. We've seen countless examples of execs over-promising things throughout gaming history. No Man's Sky, Daikatana, Fable, Spore, Anthem, Duke Nukem Forever, Aliens Colonial Marines, Rise of the Robots, Watch Dogs, The Day Before, Concord, Fighter Within, Two Worlds, any game made by Peter Molyneux, and Cruis'n USA is just another one of these. You see, the N64 was clearly not powerful enough to run the arcade port of Cruis'n USA, and it had to be nerfed on all fronts to make it playable. So, 3 months after the N64 launch, in December 1996, Cruis'n USA was unleashed on the console. Despite the delay, anticipation was high, and reviewers, both in print and the primitive online gaming sites of the mid-1990s, were quick off the mark with some enthusiastic comments about the game and its performance on the Nintendo 64. Horrendous popping. Choppy frame rate. Haphazard collision detection. Awful music. Dreadfully inept handling. Only slightly longer than an episode of EastEnders. Reviews at the time were pretty scathing, and seeing as this was in the days where console launches were months and months apart between regions, the reviews coming in from those said primitive gaming websites and the magazines I read meant that I quickly sent it packing from my wanted list. The N64 eventually launched in the UK in March 1997, and by the time February 1998 rolled around and the game actually launched in the UK, those reviews, and the £54.99 price tag, which is nearly 120 quid today in 2025, meant that I never bothered picking it up, or even wasting my time renting it from Blockbuster. None of my friends bothered with it, I don't think I knew a single person who played it, and it was a game consigned to the annals of history for me. Until today. Now, I can't quite tell you why I decided that today would be the day that I would break my cruising virginity, but for some inexplicable reason I found myself booting it up and playing it. And sure, the frame rate is a little choppy. The pop-in is laughable at times, especially in the cities. The collision detection ranges from downright dodgy at best to bastard unfair at worst, even venturing at times into what the actual fuck is happening territory. Seriously, you can miss a car by a good 10 feet, but the game will just disagree. At the same time, you can go full pelt into a tree at 145 miles an hour and it falls over like it's made of cardboard. The speed and AI of the opposing cars has absolutely no rhyme or reason to it. You can drive flat out perfectly and still get flown past by a rival. Or you can crash 30 times and still be within a dodgy VAR decision away from first place. The entire game is pretty repetitive. The music is approaching simply red levels of fucking awful. And the trophy woman has precisely zero cleavage on display. Yet the woman waving a flag to start the race does. The end of the game scene from the arcade with Bill and Hillary Clinton is gone. And there is absolutely fuck all in the way of things to run over. And there seems to be a massive chunk of America missing. It kind of gets to Chicago in the Midwest and then bang, you're suddenly in Washington DC. But, in spite of all that negativity, I hate to say it, but it's actually bloody good fun. It's kind of like a slightly more detailed version of Outrun. Not just because of the Testarossa, which definitely is not a Testarossa, sorry Ferrari, that you can drive, but because it has so many hallmarks from that classic game. The outrageous handling where one sharp motion on the analog stick and you'll do a fucking U-turn. The sense of speed and adventure, especially in first person view. The fact that no stage looks the same, even though they basically are exactly the same, all the way through. Ridge Racer on the PS1 brought the arcade racer home to that console, just like Daytona USA and Virtua Racing did for the Saturn. Like Outrun did for the Mega Drive, or Hang-On did for the Master System. All of those games are held in high regard, despite all of them being pretty limited ports of their arcade counterparts. And in truth, Cruis'n USA on the N64 is really no different. I'd argue that it's a slightly better port of the arcade than the Saturn version of Daytona USA or Sega Rally Championship were. And yet, those games are really highly regarded on the Saturn, and Cruis'n USA was kind of forgotten, ridiculed, crapped on, chewed up, spat out, eaten by a dog, regurgitated by said dog, eaten by a bird, and then shat out onto a giant cesspit. I will point out right here that despite the critical mauling Cruis'n USA got for the N64, commercially it actually did quite well. It sold over 1 million copies in the US, and was in the top 5 selling games of Christmas 1996. So while it might sound like doom and gloom, it clearly had an audience. Less so outside the US, admittedly. It then dawned on me perhaps why this went under the radar, or, to be honest, was mauled so much by the critics. And maybe that's because the N64 is actually blessed with a lot of really good racing games. The obvious Diddy Kong Racing and Mario Kart 64 aside. There was Top Gear Rally and Top Gear Rally 2, Beetle Adventure Racing, MRC or Multi Racing Championship if you want to sound posh. There was F-Zero X, Extreme G2, Wave Race 64, San Francisco Rush, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. There's even Wipeout 64, Road Rash 64, Destruction Derby 64, Ridge Racer 64. For the total number of N64 games released, there's a hell of a lot of racing games, and there's a hell of a lot of really good racing games. And just as I thought I was going a little mad, wondering just how out of touch my gaming senses have become by having as much fun with Cruis'n USA as I was, I started looking at some forum posts and discussions, and remarkably, it seems I'm not alone. There's actually a lot of people with incredibly fond memories of this game. People who recognise the shortcomings, but are kind of able to accept them as they are and find thrills in the game in spite of them. And I've somehow become very much one of them. I get the arguments at the time. 55 quid for a game you can literally finish in half an hour is pretty ridiculous. Given inflation from the time, 120 quid for a 30-minute game is probably a stretch too far even for EA. But today, with the joys of emulation and multiple ways of acquiring this game for far less than 120 quid, it provides some really good entertainment, as well as modern hardware grunt being able to deliver a far more polished experience than it probably was at the time. The game spawned sequels. Cruis'n World is apparently even better than USA, And while the jury seems more out on the third game, Cruis'n Exotica, there's plenty more cruising for me to get through. So if you've got a bit of love for those quarter-munching, time-extending, checkpoint-reaching classic arcade racer games, the Outruns, the Hang-Ons, the Ridge Racers, the Daytonas, I highly encourage you to give Cruis'n USA on the N64 a try. It may not have been the technological leap forwards the N64 should have delivered at the time, but playing it now as a retro game, and it's much easier to appreciate what it is. Caveated, of course, as being a product of past generations. There's a hell of a lot of fun to have with it. You may not get trophy cleavage, but it finds other ways to put smiles on your face. Thanks for watching. I've uploaded my full playthrough of the game if you can't be bothered to acquire or play it, so feel free to have a look at that. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on Cruis'n USA and any other N64 races in general, as I'm always after recommendations of classic games to play. Like and subscribe and all that jazz. Until next time, be awesome to each other, and I unconditionally love your hecking faces.